and it's given an ownership, and so it has to be tracked just for the purposes of it being a very controlled and checked environment. And so that's where I got practical knowledge right from the side. I think even the feasibility, when we would be looking with the process engineers for the other process philosophy, in an oil and gas project, that's where it really starts, where they would think that, well, okay, this is the sort of oil or gas that we have, and this is how we think it can be done. And so once they said that, then everyone else starts working to that, and then it kind of grows with it. So I've done a lot of asset management, and that's where the experience and the training came from.
And how recently is that? Is that a while ago or?
No, my last project was on the Chardonnays deep water project, and Chardonnays in the Black Sea, Chardonnays 2, and that was 2017.
Oh, right, quite recently, yeah.
Yes, and then
Hi,
since
Nick.
then, since then, the next place where there was some asset delivery, but not anywhere near oil and gas, was with Heathrow, just before the third runway got blocked, and then the COVID came in.
Oh,
But
right. Okay.
yeah, but no industry, and I've worked in a number of industries. No industry comes close to oil and gas, for the reason why it has to be safe. It's in everybody's interest that it's safe. So
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Daz.
Hi, Daz.
Hi, hello, hi.
Sorry, a little bit late.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in having a chat with you offline on that, Audrey.
Okay, that's fine, George. Yes.
I've also been investigating oil and gas. I'm a BIM assessor for Lloyd's.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I did one with a big oil and gas firm in Italy.
In Italy.
One of the big firms.
Was it Snambrogetti or no?
Yeah, to be honest, they're part of one of the big petrol companies out there. I'll try and remember. It's a couple of years ago now, but it was very interesting.
Okay, I think we're just waiting for one other person, but maybe we should maybe get started.
Cool.
If that's okay with everyone.
Yes.
I'll do my little BIM4Housing introduction, which most of you have heard any number of times, but just for the newbies. George took over BIM4Housing just over a year ago. At that time, the perception of BIM was borderline technology-led. He wanted to move that on and make it more of an information-led in terms of requirements to improve processes. He often calls it better information management. Recognizing that different stakeholders require different information, we established working groups in design, construction, manufacturing, operations, development, and advisory. They meet roughly each month and feed through to working groups who are the ones responsible for delivering outcomes. Currently, we have work streams. We have 4 work streams: fire safety, of which obviously this is part, MMC, standardized data, and sustainability. 2 more about to start: change management and digital O&M. So what we're doing today, which as you're probably aware is a follow-on from a meeting, the first roundtable on this subject we had last week, will feed directly through up into BIM4Housing and through the GTI into the MHCLG. So hopefully this will be, I won't say we're the voice of the industry, but we're part of the voice of the industry leading into legislation. So, George.
Yeah, so the first thing is what we're trying to do is relate the asset information principally, initially, against the risks that those assets are protecting against. And one of the things, Nick's on the call. What we've tried to do within GTI is to glue that together. So I'm responsible within GTI for the asset information, but there's others like Dwayne and Nick that are looking at things from the classification of risk and how is that dealt with. And Nick has shared with me some work that he's been doing, which is basically enabling us to classify what the different levels of risk are, so that we can bear with me, just show you that. So the point is that we're not defining risk in a vacuum. It's being done in the context of Uniclass. So this is also being fed back up, and whatever risks we identify, we can then relate that through to Uniclass. So that's work that Nick's got going underway. So the other risk that we've identified is the risk of something being an asset being affected by the risk. Richard, we went through that yesterday, didn't we? So
that's right. Initially we've been looking at this in terms of the risks that an asset mitigates. But what kept being thrown up, which I think not unnaturally, was what were the actual risks to an asset? For example, a fire door having a cat flap cut into it. So we've actually changed or supplemented question 1. So it's question 1A and 1B. So initially we're looking at what the risks are that AOV mitigates. And then we'll be looking at what are the specific risks to an AOV itself in terms of its operation. We've also added a comments field, or whatever we're calling it. We found that we got a lot of answers to questions with a lot of supplemental information, which was very valuable, but wasn't specifically an answer to a question. Daz in particular has been giving us some very valuable insights from the design process. It's not information we wanted to lose or discard, but it wasn't specific to answer your question. So we put it into sort of another field on the document so that it's there and visible. And it's that kind of stuff that will actually inform the introduction to the document and supplementary information throughout. So, George, do you want to introduce the first question?
Yeah, so really what we're looking at, do you want to open it up, Richard? So
Jess, sorry.
Okay, so you'll see there that what we've actually got are the risk of smoke inhalation and
just zoom in a bit. Sorry.
And potential suffocation. Also, how could the smoke actually hinder the means of escape? And the other thing that came out of the meeting last week that I've not appreciated, I mean, I guess you guys all would, is that the AOV is also playing a part in replacing air, not simply exhaust. So that was something that was a learning thing for me. We've then got so are there any things, just if you look at those, I appreciate many of you have actually given us your own lists, and we're consolidating those into this master list, but we've not had time to do all of that yet. But what we'd like to do is really capture from you over the next sort of 5 minutes or so any things that you can think of based on your experience that you've come across that we've not included for there.
Yeah, can I just interject there? Some of these questions are, relatively speaking, quite straightforward. If we can get through those quite in a focused way quite quickly, will give us more time for the more complex ones. If I call you and you're just going to agree with what's already been said, kind of do it briefly, because we don't want to be treading water. We want to be more moving forward, if that's okay. So, Audrey, you first. Is there anything that you're aware of that you've seen, other than what you've perhaps written yourself, that is glaringly missing from this listing?
No, not with regards to AOVs and what risks they are mitigating.
Excellent, excellent. Luke?
I've just, the questions that George posted, I've just put my answers in the chat actually.
Okay.
So I put harm to residents, reducing heat build-up so you don't end up with other combustion, reducing smoke damage to the building itself,
Yeah.
and then keeping the escape free.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you could do it, if everybody could do as Luke does, obviously share it with us verbally, but if you can type it into the chat, then just can cut and paste it straight onto the document now. It saves a lot of messing around later on. Anybody else got anything that they think should be added into question 1A?
That's good.
I'm going to take that as a no and say that that question is completed. Okay, question 1B. This is concerning risks to the actual AOV itself. What are the risks to the operation, the performance of that AOV? Now we've got a listing down there. Can you just scroll? I think we can read those all on screen, can't we? Is there anything there that anyone thinks is missing? Is there anything missing from that listing?
Well, I'm trying to read, but if there isn't an AOV being left propped open,
yes, we've got.
by
I think we
residents.
have that.
You've got that.
Yeah, we've got that somewhere. Propped open or propped shut or something.
Stuck open or stuck shut. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so that's covered. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Leona,
So,
anything,
there is
anything
one,
you
I
can
guess.
see? Sorry.
There's one other thing with how the system is actually set up. So there have been instances of buildings where like all of the AOVs throughout the whole building opened at the same time. So instead of actually getting rid of the smoke, it created a chimney effect and sucked air in.
Okay.
So,
right. So you're talking about what would you term that? Like a system, the actual system setup.
That's the system.
Synchronicity of the system setup.
Yeah, it's like the cause and effect. It's the cause and effect of the system, but actually making sure that is set up and not just a document, that making sure that is actually what's happening.
That
So
you've got to look at the thing as a whole rather than just individual AOVs.
So yeah, it's like a testing of the test against the cause and effect, which in theory should be commissioned, but almost you need to go, yes, it was designed this way, and yes, it operates the way it was designed.
It's still something we need to be aware of and actually have down there. Luke, would you do me a favour and put that in the chat?
Yeah.
And then just can whip that over. Leona, is there anything else you can see that we should have in there?
No, not specifically to AOVs, but I don't know if we're talking about system-wise, because system-wise, you know, MCPs, for example, it's prone for vandalization, and you know, sometimes housing associations won't have the necessary keys to either reset the system or activate a system for testing.
Okay, well, that's a good point for us to put into sort of like any other information that's valuable but not totally relevant to this question, but we want to keep. Could you pop that into the chat box for me?
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic. And just put that into the comments, whatever we're calling it, field. Steve, anything?
Apologies, I've got lots of builders in at the moment, so
no
worries, I'm on mute. I would say other trades not knowing the whole reason why an AOV is fitted, and then subsequently fitting things that would hinder its operation.
Compromise it.
Yeah. Could you give an example of that, Steve?
I can. I actually got someone who's put a soffit over a fascia and soffit over over an AOV vent, and it won't open now. So it's full 1.5.
Excellent. Okay. Could you jot that in as well?
Yeah, we'll do. Go back on mute.
Dwayne, are you still there? I haven't got you on my screen. Is Dwayne there?
He joined earlier, but he's doesn't seem to be there now.
Okay, no worries. I don't see everybody on my screen, so I can't always tell. Okay, so does anybody else have anything to add to that one? If not, we can consider it.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'm going back to Luke's comment about the AOVs being part of a system. I think that when we are putting in the comments, we should talk about compartmentalization. If an AOV is in a compartment, then it'll have to be able to act independently of the other AOVs as well. So there's a two-stage issue here, and I think it needs to be factored in. If the AOV is in a central circulation area, then of course what Luke is saying is really crucial. But if it's in a compartmentalized area, then it needs to be able to act alone.
Yeah, could you put that into the comments field for me, Audrey?
Yes, I'll do that.
If you could do that, that'd be fantastic, and then just can put it actually into the document. Anybody else?
That was part of the cause and effects thing. But there was one other one that someone mentioned about other trades doing things.
Yeah.
I guess potentially how, if the AOV is potentially used to access the roof, which is sometimes used, we've had instances where contractors have gone onto roofs of buildings, but the access is through the AOV, and they've opened that up and then not been able to close it again because they didn't know about that system, and we've had to send a contractor in afterwards to reset the AOV system. So it follows on from that.
Yeah. Again, could you pop that into the comments for me, and we can add that in?
Richard, that's a really important thing that I forgot to add when we were going through this at the weekend. That was the point that we discussed on Wednesday, where Will was explaining that the actuator can be set to maybe have 1,000 cycles, whereas, which is probably fine if it's a roof light on but if that roof light is also being used for access, then it probably needs a higher resilience actuator of maybe 10,000 cycles.
That's right.
In principle, I think that the point was, the consensus was that roof lights which have got actuators on them, in other words AOVs, should not be used for access. Yeah, but there are circumstances where they are used for access, and under those circumstances we need to recognize that. So I think that's a risk to this part, and it's also part of the asset information, which is the next question.
Yeah. Do you want to put that in, George?
Yeah.
Just put notes, because I think we're aware of that, just to make sure we don't miss it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Nick here.
What?
Nick?
Nick?
Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks. No, I'm just a bit concerned about describing it as risks to the asset. I think the risks are to it not functioning properly or whatever. If someone saw that we were concerned about risk to an asset, people would think that we were taking the eye off life safety.
Right, no, it's about asset performance. yeah,
that's right.
We're not worrying about it getting scratched.
Yeah. So that was just a point I thought might be useful.
That's a good point. Actually, we did have it written in as the performance of the asset, but the title seemed very long, so we made it shorter. Maybe we shouldn't have done it.
Risk of the asset performance.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely, Nick. Very much so.
And that ties back to some bigger thinking about classifying systems by their vulnerability and their criticality, which then gives you your priority for monitoring. So, if we're saying that AOVs are highly vulnerable and highly critical, then maybe we should think about electronic mechanisms for monitoring their condition. Whereas if they are less vulnerable or less critical, we might say a yearly inspection will do fine. So anyway, that's my role.
Well, that's a very good point, actually. Would you put that into the chat for me, Nick?
I'll try.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to call that closed, and we'll move through. If you can scroll down to question 2, just there. That's the notes. Okay, question 2. What information do you need to know about an AOV to ensure it performs as required? This is obviously distinct from question 1B, although there will be some crossover. George, do you want to run with this one?
Yes. So we've got an exercise going on at the moment with the housing associations, with BIM4Housing associations, and HACT, to try and produce data templates that are then standardized with the properties and information that's needed for each of the key asset types. And what I want, one of the challenges that we've got is what information is typically provided at the moment. So we want to get your expert views on that. And if I just show you this, the point is that there are lots of different data sets that relate to product information, type information. This is MBS from the MBS toolkit. So here we've got the properties, many of them COBie properties, but there are some items that are specific to AOVs, aerodynamic free area there, for example, which are defined. We've also got the ones that are defined in IFC. So we've got a range of different things here, which are also important for us to pick up. We've also got here from the declaration of performance. So this is something that's coming through from the SEN standards. And all of this information is coming through from different people wanting different information. And what we're trying to do is to say, well, yes, we've got that information, but what we actually want to do is gather everything that all of these different people want into a single data set. So the purpose of this exercise is to really see, let me just switch that off. It's really to make sure that we've got the information that you as in your role would want, because some people want to just say it needs to be compliant with the British standard, and others will need to know what that actually means in terms of information. Okay, so can we pull that up, Jess? We lost the document now.
Where's the document gone? There we go. Now, we've had quite a lot of answers on this already, so I'm hoping that most of you will have already looked through that. Just, you want to just post this into the chat anyway, so everybody's got that available if they've not looked at it already.
This section here has come from SE Controls for us. So this is coming out of what's in the standards. Can you zoom in on that a little bit? Now, I think the important thing about this, and this is what we've learned this last week, there's a lot of really good information that helps somebody who is a designer select the appropriate product to make sure that it can perform to the level that's needed, right? But from an asset management point of view, what we actually want to know is whether that particular AOV, what its settings were in that context, how was it put together? What are the component elements that go to make that up? Because from an asset management point of view, we don't want to have to go off and try and interpret a data standard, or sorry, a British standard as to what that outcome should be. So although it's important to have this available to the person that's making the assessment, it might be that they're buying a new actuator for an AOV in 5 or 10 years' time, or when they're maintaining it, they might need to check to make sure that that actuator has been set to work in the way that it needs to work. And from what I understand from SE controls, the aerodynamic free area can be unique to each instance. And therefore, what we need to be doing is recording what that opening should be, for example. Right, can we scroll down there, Jess?
So I'm assuming that you've gone through this, most of you have gone through this to some level. Is there anything that anybody has come across that makes them think, wait, no, we need more than that? Darren.
I think, sorry, should I carry on or?
Yeah, carry on, Audrey.
I think that if there's testing to be done, it needs to be done by people who understand the differences, that there could be differences in standards. I mean, we have the European standard. I see there and the European norms. Sometimes there are very slight differences between that and the British standard. So if when the testing is being done, the people or the person doing the testing has to have that appreciation that this might be an actuator, or the total set would have been set to a British standard.
So in terms of what we need to know that the testing has been done in a consistent manner, and the results of that testing are clear and comprehensible and consistent.
Not only that, but it's just that if the person does not believe, the person doing their testing does not believe that there could be some slight nuances, and therefore they should raise it if it does happen, then they'll just be correcting or accepting these things. But it's a build-up. Oftentimes, for an accident to happen, there's a build-up of little things that have carried on. 0.1 millimeter here, 0.2 here, 0.1, 0.5 here, 0.5 here. And because they are testing to either ASTM or this or that, and it's not British standard or it's not European norm, you are lucky when they all work the same. But sometimes there are minute tolerances which are acceptable from one standard or the other.
But when they add up, it's cumulative, they become something relevant. Could you put that in the chat for me, Audrey?
Yes, I will.
Fantastic. Yes. Varun, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I think on this, one of the things I'd put in straight away is, are they actually competent enough to be testing? I think that's one thing I'd probably pick up quite quickly, making sure that where we talk about standards, do they actually have the right experience and the relevant experience to actually?
Yeah, I think that comes in question. Is it question 4, George? We get into that.
Yes.
Yeah. We've got that in there, Varun. As you can imagine, a lot of these questions sort of overlap, so we're trying to kind of.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
So
where we're trying to go with this is if we make an assumption, and I know this is a big assumption, that everybody believes that we should be having competent people undertaking all of the tasks at the appropriate time. But it's not adequate to simply say, is that person competent or not? We also need to make sure that they're competent in that particular task, and also that they have the right backup information, so that we're not entirely reliant on them having been on a course 2 years ago. So that's the critical thing, to ensure that we've got that belt and braces, so that we're not simply looking at a process of risk transfer.
Yeah, and we'll go into that in a lot more detail actually in when we get into number 4.
Looking through, I think you've covered everything in that, because my notes for this was how is it designed to perform in that specific space. So that's your O&M, installation, drawings, commissioning, cert, cause and effect. How should it be maintained? So specifically, how has the manufacturer specified that should be maintained, not just us maintaining it, however, actually specifying.
Product specific.
What type of system? So is it powered? Is it natural? Are they window vents, roofs? What kind of actuators? You've got that already on there. And does it serve a dual function or multi-function? So quite a lot of our things also serve for ventilation of a building. The newer things being installed are ventilation as well as smoke shafts as a secondary function, a bit like emergency lighting almost. It's just lighting until there's a fire or until it's used, and then it's emergency lighting.
So you're happy then that we've pretty much covered everything?
I think so. I think you've covered everything in that, like the group of text there.
Anybody think we haven't? Are there any naysayers? Nick?
I think Audrey's point was an interesting one, and that is that from the limited experience I've had of talking to people that do the inspections, or sorry, the certification, it does appear that there are a number of different certification bodies who even maybe looking at the British standards, Audrey, but certainly if you're bringing in a product from Europe that is complying with the EN standards, then that could introduce, as you say, an inconsistency there. I know work is going on to try and standardize a lot of these inspections and testing, but it's a very interesting point as to whether that is being done in a consistent way.
Yes, it is. Yes, that's why I say that the testers should feel emboldened, and I think it should be part of their training, because it does cause big problems. It does. I don't want to take too much time, but it does cause a problem if they don't feel bold enough to say it, and we are being forced because of the competitive advantage that exists within the global supply chain. We are being driven to go for the cheapest or the most economical, and so therefore, if you are an asset provider and you are held to the very last minute on your program, you will be forced down one route, and it might just not comply. And you're forced to take it, and then problems begin.
Yeah, just on that's an interesting point, that one of the things that has come out of the various different roundtable sessions is that most of these assets that we're talking about here, and AOVs is a good example, it's not a single product, it's an assembly of products.
Yes.
In many cases, in the case of AOVs, it might just be a window that it looks exactly the same as all the other windows. But that particular one has got some additional engineering behind it to enable it to operate
to act in a certain way.
And therefore, what we really need to do is to make sure that we're getting all of the information about what the constituent parts are, and what their replacements are as well. Because although obviously it's better if we went back to SE controls in 4 years' time to have an AOV replaced if it was damaged, that's not always going to be the case. And therefore, what we need to be doing is making sure that the information about the asset includes all of the constituent elements as well. because we don't know what is going to happen in the future. So therefore, that's something that should be required.
Yes, I think I'll add to the chat too, just listening to what you've said, George, that should that happen, I think that the AOV, the surrounding within the compartmental wall that it is in, needs to be checked for air tightness and gas tightness. And I think that would go some way in helping, just in case if you went back to the original asset provider, they've got to go to another factory, another provider, and they may have slightly different tolerances. So if the setting of the AOV is not checked for gas tightness or air tightness, then of course we've lost it. It might just, it's not an AOV anymore.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioning.
Okay, so sorry.
Nick here.
Yeah.
Go, Nick.
I just say that the commissioning and maintenance and inspection has got to be of the system. You can't inspect an AOV. Because all you can do is look at it. What you have to do is to check that the system operates by setting up a signal or whatever. And I think the distinction is, if there are certified inspectors of AOVs, I want to ask how come? Because surely they need to also inspect the control panel and the communications and the fire alarm system. So I think we have to be careful that we don't get into a system like was just mentioned, where we check the AOV, but we don't check that it's airtight when it's meant to be, or that it's built into a wall that is in some other way defective. So it's the system that needs to be commissioned, and it's the system that needs to be checked.
Well, it's both, Nick. Where you've got individual components that need to be oiled and checked to make sure that they're performing properly, then that needs to be done. But you're quite right that the overall system needs to be checked as well. It's not an either or. You need to do both.
No, okay, but
yeah, no, good point though. That it's not just the individual asset. No, it's the system.
Sorry,
and
go on.
And the surroundings, because the system, but what I know, it will not pick up unless you have a seasoned tester. It will not pick up if the surrounding wall or the roof that is sitting in it has lost its flashing, or some felt has come off. It will not pick that up. But these are the things that let smoke through, and you do not always have people who've got a lot of experience behind them who are bold enough to say that, look, this is crossing away from the element itself to the surrounding element.
Yeah, this is coming down into we're getting into the experience of testers and competence.
Yes.
Let's hold that until we get into question 4 and use the time there when we're focusing on that. I think possibly at this stage, if that's okay. So in terms of this question, number 2, what information do we need? Is there anything else that anyone can think of that we should have included in that listing? No, I think we're all agreed, in which case I'm going to tell just to cut and print that, and we'll move through down to question 3, which is the tasks, method statements, procedures required to ensure the asset is installed, commissioned, inspected, and maintained properly. Here again, there'll be a bit of a crossover into question 4, but if we can try and keep it as focused as possible and keep competence and training, etc., into question down into question 4, and just focus on the rest of the question right now. George.
Yeah, what we've learned is that there's industry training. So there's the Smoke Association, I can't remember the term, that trains people on how to work generically on asset types, in this case AOVs or smoke vents or whatever the terminology is. But it's also the case that you need to take account of the manufacturer's own specific information. And in some cases, well, in the case of AOVs, I'm told that all of the people that are members of the industry association, of which SESI controls a part, a couple of years ago, they agreed that all of that training would be provided at no cost. So I think that's right, is it, Leona? They provide anyway the instructions so that can be provided. In the case of some of the other products like cavity barriers and fire doors, some manufacturers won't provide that information or don't provide that information other than through a paid training session. So what we're doing, the suggestion that we're making is that information, if it's available, should be provided by the manufacturer along with the product, because we do need the information about that manufacturer specific set of instructions.
Yeah, we've got situations where manufacturers are loath to give out too much information because they consider it part of their IP, which is obviously opens a whole new can of worms.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 3. Again, making the assumption that most of you already had a look through this. In fact, many of you inputted into it already. Is there anything anyone could see that is glaringly missing? Luke, you'll find something.
I'm just having another quick look through it.
Okay, okay. No worries.
This is a question I wasn't quite sure on myself because I'm not on the installation commissioning side of things, more on the maintenance side.
Sure.
Well, it's maintenance as well, Luke. Yeah. So what we're trying to differentiate here, I mean, if I think what might be useful is just to show you what we have in terms of SFG 20, which is the. Bear with me a second. Just whilst you're reading.
Not shared.
Yeah, sorry. Right now. So, can you see this? These are the.
George, your microphone's a bit quiet. Is there anything you can do with that?
I don't think so. I don't know why.
That's better. That's better now.
Okay. Right. So this is something that I've been directed through from the British Standard. So this is talking about the work instructions or what work should be done, but it's not desperately detailed. It's just saying that we should make sure that the ventilators operate correctly, smoke dampers close, etc. So this is at that level. This is from SFG 20, which is the mechanical services, largely mechanical service, M&E services standard for maintenance. So this is a weekly check, which corresponds to what's in the British Standard, and that's great that there's consistency there. And this is what the standard is at 24 months. So you'll see here that we've got a step-by-step stage that should be carried out. This should complement the fact that we've got a specialist, competent person that has been trained to undertake that work, But what this is doing, it's enabling them to have a proper checklist, which should be able to help the process. So what we'd like to do is see if we can mirror this type of checklist for all the asset types that we're working with. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, George, but one of the first things that I picked up, and it may not have anything to do with AOV, so it might, because where it says smoke dampers or whatever it is, open and close in some areas, it says open, and then it says closed in certain areas. I'm not sure. I think it was the page before this one.
Yeah.
If we are at question 4, are we there now or not? Because if you are there, then I think, yeah, where it says or open in some systems, you see, it might be helpful when we get there to explain in which systems, because if it's above the ceiling, then it should be open, and the ceiling should be a fire resistant ceiling, and it should be open to allow the smoke to go through the compartmentalized areas from one compartment to the other, and the damper would open to enable the smoke to go through and not come into the room. And the duct there will be a fire resistant duct. So if we are doing the same for this particular element, then I think we need to be able to explain in which circumstance it should perform in one way, and in another circumstance it should perform in another way. And it goes back to what I was saying about what you're doing within a compartment and when it's a shared space. Because within a compartment, you want to give the people in there the chance to escape. That's the whole thing. And if it's through, so they should be protected from the other people, from the other compartment and vice versa. But if it's through a shared area, then the performance is different. So for the BS 9999 13.5, the 1, 2, 3, smoke dampers closed or open in some systems, where it relates to AOVs, then we should be able to say in which circumstances do we need it to perform A or B, you know.
I absolutely fundamentally agree with you.
Yeah.
Right. I can't say how much I agree. This is one of my concerns, that this is what people point to because it's the British standard. Yeah. And therefore there is an assumption that should be adequate. And some people will say, well, it's the competent person to interpret that. Yeah. But I agree with you completely that what we should be doing is making sure that competent person is given that clear set information about that particular instance of that particular element.
Yes.
The other thing
something like that shouldn't be open to interpretation.
Exactly.
Well, the BS standards generally are quite loose. And I think the smoke dampeners close or open, that would be covered by
another standard.
The cause and effect documentation. Because in theory, doesn't happen very often, but in theory, we should be supplying any contractor we ask to maintain something, the cause and effect documentation for that specific building. So when they go to AOV 2 on the second floor or whatever, they know from that cause and effect, this should open when there is a fire in this compartment or this area. I know that's what should happen. In theory, they should be testing that cause and effect is correct and is functioning the way it should.
And is that method of working by giving them the cause and effect matrix or documentation?
The cause and effect stuff, actually getting hold of that is very difficult. It needs to be in some kind of digital format. So the way I could envision that is almost you, rather than giving them a PDF and going, here you go, here's a PDF, take it along with every service visit and read through the whole thing when you're doing it. You almost need it to be on a app or something. They go around, they go to the fire alarm, and you pull up the SFG20 task list for the fire alarm or the AOV panel. But then there might be additional stuff that the manufacturer requires you to do, or the cause and effect requires. So specific to that one instance. So SFG 20 covers a generalization of this is how you inspect it, but then you almost need when I go to AOV number 2, I expect this to close when there's a fire here. So I need to check that that works, but you need that specifically. I do my standard SFG, does it open? Is it oiled? Does it work? Whatever that is. And then I go, okay, cause and effect says that this should open if there is a fire there, but not if there's a fire there.
But you're saying that the person might not have access to the cause and effect document.
Yeah. I think that's generally the case.
Generally the case.
It's difficult to get hold of these in the first place, and bear in mind we've got a lot.
Can I ask you just what do you mean it's difficult? They don't exist, or
they can't? Yeah, sometimes they don't exist. So for example, we may have a lot of building owners. Most of the housing stock is old at the moment. Most of our housing stock in the whole of the UK is aging stock, and records for this just didn't.
They don't exist.
They were in a box that was just dumped in a corner somewhere years and years ago, filed away. No one ever looked at them because they just did what they normally do. And now we're getting to the point where we're like, actually, we needed to know about that, and we need to know about that now. And we're having to go back out to these buildings and get someone to inspect them and tell us how they are meant to operate, because we never had that documentation. That what we did maybe 30 years ago, and someone just filed it. And it's not a fault of the people 30 years ago, because I'm sure in 30 years' time, people will be saying the same about what we're doing here and going, oh, they did that wrong, or they should have done this and recorded this. Like, they will.
But look, you see, if you send someone onto site to do an inspection, and whether he has the cause and effect diagram or so on, and he sees the asset and he doesn't know that, or he doesn't pick up, or he doesn't flag that this particular asset is above the ceiling. However, in this area where I'm at, they've changed the light fitting, and so they may have compromised the properties of the ceiling, and just note it. So it goes into another work area. So it goes from the testers, who may be with the fire team, then it goes to the building people to come and look to see whether they've changed the light fitting, put in a new luminaire. There are gaps now around where the thing was sealed. If the person just goes onto site, looks only at his element without looking at what the surrounding is, then the element could be okay, but it's not really working as it ought to be, and that is a fundamental problem.
Yeah, I would agree with you to an extent on that, but
because, hold on, look. If just hear me out for this one. There are systems which are set above the ceiling, and above the ceiling to that particular system, that particular element, there has to be an access panel. That's the number one thing, because you need to be able to access that element to go and test it. Immediately it will flag up to an experienced tester. If he goes there, there's no access. How am I going to test this thing? That's a big issue. If the access has been compromised, or the surrounding has been compromised, again, he can just flag it up. It may not be in his control to fix it, but he's flagged it that in flat B or room C, they've had some fittings done. They've changed this or that or the other. So somebody come and check. And it might just save a life. That's what I'm saying, that the tester should have a little bit of confidence and some experience to pick up.
So
pick up the things that aren't in the listing. Pick up the things that aren't actually in the methodology. That's just a bit of code, really.
The issue you've got with there is if you start asking your AOV contractor to inspect the lights, the fire alarm, and stuff.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
I feel like that is almost a task, and I do believe that training for fire risk assessors needs to be more comprehensive than it is currently. I feel like that falls very much under the fire risk assessment part, and going, what has changed since the last fire risk assessment, and does it affect it?
Yes.
I think we would struggle from a cost point of view if we started saying to all our contractors, can you inspect, can you just check everything around this room to make sure it has
everything that could impact?
Well,
but that's not what I'm saying, however, Luke. But I get your point. I get it clearly from a cost point of view.
Yeah.
But I'm not asking them to do that. I'm just saying that you know, every now and again you can pick up something very critical which could help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think I understand where you're coming from, Audrey, and it comes down again to competence and what competence actually means, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if we go to focus back on the question just for a
Yeah.
moment, is there anything that needs to go in these answers before you guys will be satisfied and say, yeah, that covers it?
Other than recording, maybe this comes to Golden Thread and BIM, recording a history of what the design was and how it went through construction to make sure there weren't changes carried out while it was being constructed.
Yeah.
Because yes, you might get an O&Ms at the end, but the O&M might be based on what was designed at the beginning.
Can I suggest that we leave that to number 5, which is change management?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I realise there's a big overlap, guys. I know that. I'm just trying to keep it vaguely compartmentalised, just for ease of writing it up later, if that makes sense. So anybody else, anything that you think glaringly needs to go into this section?
Nick?
Baron?
When we wrote part 6, we devoted a whole section to the role of commissioning in capturing information. That was particularly about risk information and so on. And so I think that's that sounds like the missing link, in the sense that the commissioning people will want to know the design information.
Yeah.
And they'll then see if it does what it's meant to do. But that then needs to flow on to the users, because they're meant to be maintaining that state and so on. And I think there's a negation of the commissioning stage as a key information channel. And I'd just like to see it added in. That's where the information is. All the information that we're talking about here is actually should be captured at that point. Never mind what the designer did.
Yeah, Nick, we're actually talking with a couple of commissioners to do exactly that. What we're trying to do is to get to a situation where we can standardise the way they undertake the commissioning, so that we've got a standardised, just like you can standardise the way maintenance is done.
Yeah.
We're exploring whether that could be standardised as well, and we can't really see why it shouldn't be.
No, and it should be documented so that then all the settings at rest and all the settings in action or whatever will be recorded.
Exactly, rather than it now being on a commissioning sheet that's just a paper document.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Can I just I remembered when we were going through this, producing this yesterday. I noticed in ADB, it states that an AOV needs to be as high as practically possible and positioned so the top edge is at least as high as the top door of the stair. So what interested me about that is the relationship between a different asset, which is the door, and how that AOV performs. Now, obviously, when it's first designed, we need to be able to understand that as a value. That should be an attribute of the. If that's a key criteria, we need to be recording what that is. So it's actual location, not just whether you can see it in a 3D model. If that's a key parameter, that's something that should be recorded. And also make sure that when we come on to stage question 5, which is change management, if that door at the top of the stairs gets replaced, when they need to understand the impact of that. I suppose that would be in the cause and effect record, but maybe not. Okay.
If there is one. If there is one.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 3. Are we happy with question 3? On the basis that some things will be covered in question 4 and 5. Are we happy with question 3 and the answers? Is that a yes? I'm taking that as a yes.
If anybody's aware of any other sources of that type of information, please let us know. Obviously, it needs to come through from whatever sources, but if you've got any other information, that would be great.
Remember that hospitals and schools don't comply with ADB.
Yeah.
They comply with BB100 and something else.
HDM.
Yes, that's what I said. Yeah, I was writing a report this morning saying that this kind of spawning of guidance documents should be stopped because it stops the industry learning and building up experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. An AOV in one setting should be the same as in another, really, shouldn't it? And if it's inadequate in some way, that guidance or then it needs to be bolstered up, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can't really. You shouldn't be really saying it's inadequate, but that's okay in this setting, is it?
No, exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to move down to question 4, Jis. And here we are, competence and training. What is the competence and training that should be in place, George?
Yeah, so the point that's been made is that obviously we want people to have been trained, but we don't want to be completely reliant on them just having that badge, because the point was made again last week that somebody can go on an EBOSH course for 4 days and be given a certificate to say that they are competent, but in practice they still don't have the practical knowledge to cover some of the things that it's taken probably somebody 10 years to learn.
Yeah.
So it needs to be both, really. And the other aspect of that is that there's competency, that there's a number of different levels. There's competency of the organization, and there's also competency of the supervisor and competency of the person that's actually doing the work. And all of those have got their own levels of requirement.
Okay, that's a short section in terms of answers so far. So I'm guessing you've all read that. Anybody got something to add there? I would imagine you have.
I think that experience, I mean, following on from what George is saying, I'm not sure how one can write it into this document, but I think that tapping.
So how? I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, George, Audrey.
Yes.
Because to go back to what George was saying, and also what you were saying, it's about experience.
Yes.
So how would you do this? I mean, is it feasible that you'd have like an apprentice or a trainee who's got the qualification, but they're not fully qualified until they've done 2 years with a more senior person or something like that? Would that be a route?
Well, I don't even know whether that should be enough, because the experience is there in the industry. I mean, the people are getting older, but they are there. They are the ones who can tell, an apprentice or a young person, this is important. I'm not sure how to capture it. But
that's what I'm saying. Does it need some sort of formal structure? Along with getting your qualification, you have to do 2 years on the job with someone or something like that. Would something like that work?
I think it would work with an experienced person, because even there are so many young architects who are very good at the computer, but they've never been on site. When I was doing architect, you had to go on site. You had to know the clerk of works. So you hadn't met an irate clerk of works who didn't tell you this or that. You hadn't actually been trained well. So we took we took a lot of experience from the older senior builders, you know, and I'm wondering how to capture it, because if we don't capture that information and they are no more there, then
it's going to be lost. It's going to be lost, that experience.
So I don't know how you're going to put it in this document and say, go back to the building services engineers, go back to the senior M&E engineers who used to work, you know, on the site. If they can be found, you know, you've got to go back to them.
It's transferable knowledge, transferable experience. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we capture that experience?
I agree. I don't know how. I've noted this in the operational teams that I'm in at the moment, where, for example, we lost. He was what's called a contract coordinator, so he dealt with a lot of the day-to-day administration of the contracts under a contract manager, but he had a ton of knowledge, and it was sort of like this. You would go and ask him anything about a system, and he'd been out on site to it, and he would have more knowledge than quite often a lot of our engineers, and actually our newer engineers coming in, he would know more about a system than they would. But he was 67 and he's retired now, and that information is lost. And it actually came up recently, speaking to one of the contract managers. I said, I'll tell you who would know. He asked me a question about something. I said, I'll tell you who would know. It'd be him who's just left. And he's like, oh, well, I might have to give him a call and ask him. But that's the thing. I don't know how you capture experience. I don't think experience is everything, because I think you can gain experience over a very short period. I think it's very dependent on the person. Someone who's willing to learn you can quite often find someone who's been in a job 1 or 2 years may be better and more knowledgeable than someone who's been in it 30 years. Absolutely. Because actually there's almost a peak. You almost sort of do in most jobs, you sort of do like learning all the knowledge you can, and then you just sort of go, well, okay, a lot of people go, I know enough, and then they just finish.
You reach lift-off, don't you, with some people?
Yeah, and the industry keeps moving. So I don't know. I honestly don't know how you would capture it, other than doing like regular competency checks through a period. So almost like testing, yearly testing. And going.
What about what I said about the qualification as you know, in and of itself isn't enough. That gets them a stage 1 qualification, and that they actually have to have another couple of years experience on the job for them to get full qualification, something like that it becomes actually part of the process.
Some roles do that, don't they? So for example, architects, you have to do your 3, you can't just do a BA Hons, you have to then do a master's, and there's 3 stages to it as such, but there's other industries that have that, and it's almost like maybe these should have stages where you have your level 1 competency and you can work, then you go, I work in the industry for a year, then I come back and do a level 2, then I come back and do a level 3, whatever it might be.
Which puts the mindset that it's ongoing training as opposed to I've done it now.
Yeah, but also you can also assign that to, I mean, CPD, a lot of people fall back on, they forget about CPD. They just carry on as they are, and that's fine. If you want to go in and do that at level 1 and just work at level 1 for however long, fine. But it also gives people I guess people who are procuring these client or these engineers and stuff like that and surveyors, it gives them, we are going to do a more detailed survey here. We'll look for a level 3 surveyor.
Yes. Yeah.
And because we're looking for a level 3 surveyor, we know we're going to get more detailed information. They've progressed. But we also know the payment will be higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that we've I've been very interested in this for many years, and one of the things that I've tried to break it down into is you've got information, you've then got experience. Experience and information can help you gain knowledge, and then knowledge, you can then turn that into wisdom. And they're all, it's an incremental thing. And I think that a way of doing this is to use scenarios and stories, because we're all very responsive, aren't we, to examples and things. So one of the things that we're looking at doing, it's something that Richard and I are looking at the moment, is to follow the principle of black box thinking, which is this has come from a fire engineer recommended that I should read this book called Black Box Thinking from Matthew Syed, and it's fascinating. But it's the way the airline industry, that's where the black box comes from, has made it. And part of it is to report problems and then what the solutions to those problems are. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do within BIM4Housing. So to get people to try and share with us the experience that they've got of particular scenarios. So, for example, in the event, in the session we had last week, one of the fire engineers or fire risk assessors was saying that he went into a building and he saw that there was a sofa in the corridor under the AOV. And nobody had made the connection between if that actually caught fire, it would completely overwhelm the AOV. Now, he probably knew that because he'd come across it at some stage. Another example was somebody was telling me that I think it was on the recent fire in Canary Wharf, that the AOV had been forced open slightly because somebody was having a smoke in the corridor. And it was a window, wasn't it? So why wouldn't this window open? Oh, I can just push it a little bit and it opens enough. And of course, by doing that, it breaks the actuator.
That's more common than you think.
Yeah. So that's the sort of thing, isn't it, Luke, that if you've got examples of that, if we could bottle those, we can turn those into scenarios that people can learn from, can't we?
Yeah, like
I mean,
if you think about it, like the levels thing, I suspect that a fire risk, like a young or a beginning fire risk assessor would go out and say, there's a sofa in the corridor, it needs to be removed. Combustible materials in the escape areas need to be removed. And then someone with experience would say on top of that, actually, it's in a significant position underneath, like a high risk position underneath the AOV. So it's almost, you get the same thing, but then the experience or the better training would give you more detail. Or like, the AOV's been damaged, but that's all you get. And then someone might look around and go, oh, there's a cigarette butt there. It seems as though people are smoking in the building. So yeah, it's almost like observation, levels of observation, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
There is compulsory, there is talk or mention in the Hackett report of compulsory incident reporting. But of course it's up, the industry could adopt a system of the airlines, which is near miss reporting, which is much more important, of course, because there are many more near misses than there are incidents. And then that becomes the basis of training and testing material. If there are 200 pictures of effective and defective AOVs, you could test people, much more often than, having to go out on site with them or whatever. And so, the collection of scenarios, I mean, it's going to be so important because, a lot of junior experiences are going to be automated away. If the AOV reports that it's damaged automatically through the Internet of Things, then that's another fire safety inspector who hasn't learnt the lesson because the machine's done it for him. So we're going to have to find other ways of training people other than junior apprenticeships and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the thing about the airline industry, by the way, is basically it's almost the methodology they use is, if you've made a mistake, if you admit it, there'll be no sanction.
You've got,
so
if you report it within 10 days,
if you report it within 10 days, it'll be used as a learning experience, and you won't get any trouble for it. So it's become the automatic culture that if a mistake's made, and everybody makes mistakes, rather than automatically we must cover it up or I must get away with it. The culture is be open about it, and then people can learn.
Yeah, that's the big danger of the whole Grenfell response, is that we're creating a culture where you can't admit things aren't perfect.
Yeah.
Now we're trying to make them perfect, and there's lots of good things there, but and it's difficult to find the right words, but we need to find a way of managing the imperfections.
Yes.
Because otherwise we're going to have 18,000 accountable persons deliberately lying every time they publish their fire safety case.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's a bigger issue.
I take that point though.
Just going back to what Nick was saying, part of the bill, the part of the role of the safety regulator is going to be to establish that mandatory occurrence reporting system, and the whole point behind that is to encourage duty holders and accountable people to actually report any structural and fire safety events and occurrences that aren't classified as being detrimental, but could actually help the industry learn. So I think that's one of the things we need to look at and almost think about, well, what needs to go into that mandatory reporting system in terms of guidance, and what actually needs to be established as part of it. Is it a case of when it's something that's going to cause a huge implication and problem, or is it going to be something that actually, as you were saying, this black box theory, and George and I have spoken about this in the past, is it a case of use that principle of, well, it got found, it got captured within 10 days and reported, and therefore this is a list of all the information that's gone out to the industry to say this is what you can prevent.
Yeah, it's a big culture change, isn't it, Varun? To rather than look at how can we transfer risk, the question is how can we manage the risk by people being more open and collaborative.
Completely. I mean, George, it comes back to what we were discussing last week when I told you about the sprinklers that have been turned off. And it's just about being able to make people understand and educate them throughout, every single working day. I mean, you sit on a call with Nick, you learn something new every single time. And it's the same principle, like, Nick does a lot what I do. I learn a lot from him. In the same way, we should be having these forums where people will actually learn from each other.
Well, if I can just tell you, we are actually, certainly within the next 6 weeks, launching BIM4Housing Black Box, which will be a forum which can be, which enables people to actually post real experiences that they've had anonymously, if they wish. And we're hoping that we'll get possibly a higher level of transparency, shall we call it, from people, and it will snowball, because I think it's the first time it's been done, and I think it's will answer a lot of the things that we're raising right now.
That sounds brilliant. I think the only thing we need to think about is how we market it, because we don't want people just to think that it's something BIM related, because I think this is, although
no. Absolutely, that's a good point.
I understand the information management side will have a huge implication anyway when it comes to this, so that's great. But people get thrown off by the term BIM because they don't understand it.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to make it better information management, isn't it? Really.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we're very much trying. Well, George has been trying, as I mentioned in my introduction, right from the beginning, to keep it away from the technology angle and kind of rebrand BIM in a way that it is about information management. It's not about technology. Technology is an enabler. It's not an end in itself.
Definitely.
Okay, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. Well, let me. So I'm going to assume that number 4's done. Unless
I'm
anybody
sorry, can I just pick up one point that Audrey made about the competency of individuals?
Yes.
It might be worth having a look at BSI Flex 8670. This also is sort of like an extension to what we discussed last time in terms of IFC. SDI 19 is only a certification at organization level, whereas BSI Flex 8670, it sort of like provides a framework of organizations providing individual specific records of training and assessment in terms of their skills, knowledge, and experience. And I think that's very much in line with what Audrey was saying about the an individual's experience. So to comply with BSI Flex 8670, an organization needs to be able to determine the specific level of knowledge and experience one must possess to carry out their specific role. So I think that's maybe something
that's a very good.
I
think that's a very good point, Leona. Could you type that in for me?
Yeah.
And just
put that the Flex series is changing because it's going to become a British standard, isn't it? In 2022. So making people aware of that's really important. That's a good point on the Flex series.
Excellent. Yeah, if you could put that in for me, Leona, then Jess will transfer that through.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jess, if you could just scroll down to question 5, by which time Leona would have finished typing, and you can whiz it over.
For anyone interested, that document's actually free at the moment.
Oh, okay. Cool.
See, it's a developing standard, isn't it? That's why.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, and this has been touched on virtually every question, I think, and that's about change management. How changes from one product to another, and also within product, I suppose, are recorded. George.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're looking at here is both in terms of new build, so existing buildings. So we've got in new build, at least in theory, we've got the technical submittal process, which in theory is supposed to manage when something gets exchanged for something else. In recent years, designers have become less inclined to actually specify products for commercial reasons, and I think also from conversations I've had with on a liability perspective. But I think that's changing, and I don't think you also need to say it's a specified item. I think you can say that it's an item that will perform the requirement that we're putting into the specification. It's important, though, to identify that there is a product, a manufactured product, that is at stage 3, say, or maybe even stage 4, so that when something gets value engineered or it gets replaced, we've got something tangible to compare it with. So therefore, that's something that we're planning to promote back into the GTI, that is something that we need to do. So I'd like to just get anybody's thoughts on that. And just before we move on to that, to say the same thing is true of existing buildings. So where we've got something being changed in, during the operational life of the building, there's no reason, to my knowledge, why we shouldn't use the same methodology of a technical submittal. It's a rigorous way of saying that we're changing that particular door closer for an alternative because, in 5 years' time, it needs replacing. The same methodology can work.
Yep. Absolutely. So, who wants to go first? Steve, we haven't heard from you for a while. Maybe you're inundated with builders. Peter.
Yeah, I guess I've been listening to all of these, so really interesting stuff. I guess for change management, yeah, I guess it's one of those things. I can think we've had an AOV system for the last year, a new AOV system, and we haven't changed our systems, so it's yeah.
You're happy with what we're saying?
Yeah.
So you're happy with the process of using a technical submittal process during operations?
I think you went over it when we did cavity barriers.
Yes. Yeah. Cool.
Luke.
I kind of feel like for operational teams, you might need a slightly cut down one, because the difference for when you're building something, you're collating all the information and you're going from nothing, a piece of land, to a full building filled with systems and commissioning certs. When you're replacing something, you're generally only replacing the one system within the building. So I do think there should be I believe it should be something like Kobe. And actually, I've been looking at things like doing surveys. We should be doing surveys and requesting survey data in a Kobe format and a Kobe style thing, so it's all consistent. I do agree with consistency, but I believe there are some bits, I don't know the full thing, but I believe there are some bits that may be able to be cut out to make it simpler for them, the operational teams, the planning systems, so you're not ending up going, well, if you want to work in development, you need to have X and Y qualifications, but then if you want to work in operations, you need to have X, Y, and Z qualifications and experience. So it's almost like you're putting operations as a much more experienced role, because you need to know everything you do in development and operations on top of that, and like project management, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess where I'd come from with that, I agree with you entirely, and certainly the Kobe format for exchanging information, I can't agree more. I think what's important is to identify what the essential characteristics are of a particular asset type, and if they're the essential characteristics that you need from a procurement and a performance perspective, it would be good to try and achieve that with the thing that you're taking out as well, so that you can do an effective comparison between what you're replacing and what is you're replacing it with. Now, obviously, that's not going to be easy, because if you're lucky if you even know what the model number is of something. But if you don't know it, you don't know it. But if you do, then that would be a good thing to be able to do. And if we've got at least a way of saying, how do we compare between what was installed and what is replacing it, then that's a formal sort of structured process.
So
that was foundational.
If you're doing it for existing buildings, the way I could see that working in operational teams is you could say, right, you have your project managers and stuff like that are running a project, but then you almost look at having a centralized team that oversees and requests information the same way we have handover teams. You almost need a handover team that runs alongside the project, that runs only a small number of people that go, okay, you're installing an AOV, you're going to need all of this information based on what we have on record about it. And if there isn't anything on record, a standard set of characteristics, or following something from a risk assessment, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also I think reading again about the O&Ms often contain what was designed and not what was installed. I mean, with commissioning, you should be really commissioning against the as-built package. Oftentimes, if the people do not know that there could be a difference between the design and what was built, you know, that would be a problem. So there needs to be an understanding of what design is, and the commissioning is against the as-built package. And the as-built package is what should be referred to. So to go back within any contract with, or if it's a housing association or so on, you need to really request the as-built package. That's what you want. That's where the changes would have been captured, and that is what you're looking at. So it's the as-built that you should be looking at, and if there hasn't been given, then it ought to be. It ought to be.
Absolutely. The interesting thing with that, Audrey, is that most of the O&M information that I look at,
yes,
the documentation, the information in there is largely the specification, because it's easy to get, because architects are quite well organised from that perspective. So that's what gets put into the O&M. Whereas actually we don't know what was actually installed. And that's really, I guess, it just reinforces what we've said earlier, and that is that we need to record the information about the actual item that was installed and how that was commissioned, how the actual item was commissioned, so that we've actually got that performance information. That's a really good point.
Yes.
But also that it matches, if you do get that as built information, that it matches what was designed, or if it doesn't, it tells you why. Because I know there have been, I can't think of an exact instance. I have something in my head and I don't know whether it's because of that, but I know there have been instances where something was designed a certain way, but then when it came to installation, when it was built, someone installed it with something else, a slightly different product, and it failed because of that. And I had in my head, I don't know if it's exactly this, but I have in my head it was something to do with a heating system, and it was just a pipe. And
yes,
the issue was it was designed a certain way to cope with a certain amount of temperature.
Yeah.
But then when it was installed, it didn't, and it ended up splitting and the pipe burst.
That's right. It would do. And these are things which I'm saying. You see, and look, if you track any product or any element, there will be the design, there will be changes. The changes would have been captured. So the person who gave or the process by which an element was allowed to be changed would be in the technical deviations section. So that will be captured. And within the technical deviations section, if the person has done, if the technical deviation has actually gone through the process, there would be the acceptance why it was done. So that's where you find that information that should be pulled back. And it is in the system. It's just knowing that I have to get the design, the technical deviation, because if the design said BS X123, and what you found out is ES this or that or EN or whatever, there will be a system where the specified item was allowed to be deviated. Maybe it was only a performance spec. What's a performance spec? Then you have the mandate to go and seek whatever you think is acceptable, but all of that will be captured within the information. And it's knowing that there will be a track. You will be able to trace it. You will be able to find where the thing started from and how it's ended where it ought to be.
Audrey, would the technical submittal process, as you know it, address? Yeah,
it should. Yes, I'm not saying that it always does, because management of buildings has been taken a certain way to cut costs, to make it more accessible. But within any designer's own area, he would have a system. He would have kept track of what he proposed, what was actually installed, and why it came to. So this information should be there. If it's not, then at least you can flag it up that, look, for the next project that I have, I need to see, there must be a repository that holds all the technical deviations, because when the deviation has been accepted, then it rebaselines. So they have done the work. Look, they only are not submitting it. You know, because
that's the issue. Like I know when it comes to design and construction, the systems in place, the IT systems and the structure in place is very comprehensive.
And
when
the monitoring,
when it then goes to operations, so basically you get that all this very detailed bit of work, sometimes following BIM already, and then it gets to handover, and you go, here's a 700-page PDF document, O&M, and that's how bad handovers end up. You end up with just a big folder filled with files that have no index, they have no way of going, oh, I'm in this one for the fire, oh, I need to then also reference the change design and all of these, and without knowledge of exactly how that file structure was put together or understanding the construction and design process as well as the operational, so lots of experience across the whole breadth, it just falls apart. And that's where it falls apart in operations, is the handover bit, because I know design and construction do it correctly, but I know operations don't. But it's not through fault of their own necessarily, it's through this gap in between.
It's through the gap,
it's
through the gap.
George,
in the interest of what we're trying to do here, just thinking this through in terms of in terms of education and knowledge transfer, if you think of anybody can think of any examples of things that were swapped out that led to an issue, that would be very useful for us to use as a learning exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anybody could think of that, that's a good bit of storytelling.
Nick, I've got your light flashing. Are you wanting to say something?
So it was just going back a bit, that part of the design of COBE and the intention of COBE was to support submittal approvals processes. And in the US, that was separated out into being a process called SPI, Specifiers, Properties, Information Exchange. And it was reviewed in a project called Lifecycle Information Exchange, and so on. And I think the US is a lot more rigorous about the checking of substitutions. It is every item has to be signed off before it can be used in the construction. So that was my impression, and so on. And I have a suspicion that it's not done that well in the UK, because I've never heard much discussion about substitutions or approvals. And certainly, we need it to be better. But it seems to be one of the gaping holes that everyone sort of takes for granted. Oh yeah, no one really checks that. Don't worry about that. Just an impression.
Peter, you're flashing.
Am I? Oh, right.
You are, yeah.
So I guess a recent example I'd give is where we've had somebody try to change an opening window into an AOV, and it was a completely different size of window, so it was cut into cavity barriers and all sorts. But there was already a smoke system in that area. So actually that could have kind of affected it, and it
totally compromised it, basically.
Yeah. So it was somebody, and again, just from a change management process, we're still looking at it. We couldn't find where that request came from. So it didn't come from a fire risk assessor or from our fire safety team. So it was just somebody decided to put an AOV into an area which already had kind of smoke control, which was a bit bizarre.
Cool. Okay. Good.
Yeah, Peter, would you put that in the chat for me? Is that okay?
That now, yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting, Nick. On SPI, it's one of the things that I've explored a few times, and I spoke to years ago, I spoke to Bill East about it, and he said that it was just an experiment that failed. But I think it's, it is the way we ought to be capturing manufacturers' information.
And not only manufacturing. I think the problem in the US was that they couldn't get the trade associations didn't even understand the problem, let alone the solution. I think we're a bit further ahead here, but it's not only the manufacturer's information. It's got to be third-party information. It's got to be, BBA certificates or whatever. It's all got to be checkable so that you can say, is this product substitution acceptable or not?
Is there anything in SPI that isn't in COBie?
No, the COBie stays the same. You just use it slightly differently.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Which is a lesson that other people in the UK should learn.
Quite. Absolutely agree.
Okay. So you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Is there anything glaringly missing or that you think you can add to question 5? I think we've got some good additions there anyway, but is there anything else anybody would like to add? That's a no from Luke. Audrey. Audrey's happy.
Yeah, I'm just typing it into the chat, and it's
just no, fantastic.
What
That's
I
lovely.
said.
Then.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks. Thank you.
Peter, you're typing yours in. Nick's typing away. It's nice to have a meeting where you just sit and watch everybody else typing.
Well, actually, I would say this process should also run through life cycle. So not just when it's being built, but also when it's being changed after 15 years, when it's being replaced after 15 years. It should follow the same structure as when it's being built, but with a reduced thing.
Good. Yeah. Definitely.
It's interesting in the PFI world, you probably know this already, but in the PFI world, at the end of the concession period, maybe 25 years, there's an expectation, a contractual expectation that the building will be delivered back to the owner in the same condition that it was when it was handed over in the first place.
Yeah, but I know the teams that are working on that, and that requirement has been forgotten, and so both the buyers and the sellers in that situation are in a deep mess.
Yeah,
it's that clause is almost equivalent to saying that there ought to be a golden thread, because they should have recorded what condition it was in and what the systems were, and etc. And there's just no way of doing it. It wasn't done. There was no statement of record at the time, etc. It's so.
There's plenty of projects that are going through at the moment with the same requirement, Nick, brand new ones.
Yeah, well, unless it's backed up by a contractual requirement for information, then it's not worth the paper it's written on.
Which the new ones are. So, yeah, absolutely.
There we go.
Luke, did you type in about your life cycle?
No, I'll type something in about that now then.
Yeah, just literally 5 words just to nudge us. It's clear exactly what you mean. So if I type it in, just ignore it. Okay, so how are we doing then? Once everybody's finished typing, are we happy?
No. I got to drop off now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you very much indeed.
Before anybody else goes, can I just raise one thing that we've been talking about? From the sessions, people have said that they found this process that we're following here very useful, because what we're doing is sharing experience and we're sort of organising this and structuring it. I hope you've felt the same. I think you probably have, because most of you are coming on it for the second or maybe even the third time. Yeah. But what we'd like to be able to do, Clarion asked last week whether we can extend it beyond the 3 asset types that we've covered, to include sprinklers or other asset types that we might go through this same process on. So what we'd like to do is get your feedback as to which asset types you would like us to figure into this, because overall, within the Housing Association data group, we've identified about 20 or so asset types that we need better information on, like lifts, for example. So we may not do the same rigor that we've done with this, although probably we would, but we're planning to continue with that. So if you could maybe suggest, I don't know, what do you agree with that as a process? Would you like to see us do more of this?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is worthwhile. This, I mean, this is going to feed into BIM4Housing and the GTI as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
well, definitely. Yeah,
yeah.
That's what it's for.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely worth doing. I've put a list in chat.
Luke's already done his list.
That's a question actually I've got, Luke, because that was raised by, might have been you, Peter, actually, the other day, was it? Whether fire blankets are actually in some residential.
Yeah, smoke curtains and fire blankets.
Fire blankets are in some of our communal spaces, in some cases with like where there's shared kitchens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Fire and smoke curtains are much rarer, and they're usually used in place of like a roller shutter, a fire roller shutter, fire rated roller shutter, except where they want to save space, because they take up less space than that does. So that's they're not very common.
Have you seen them in residential buildings often, or is it mostly in commercial settings or office?
No, I've seen them in some of our buildings come in. We've had a few recently that have come in. And so there's one where, for example, when you go down to the basement level and it's the car park, there's fire smoke curtains that block, I think, the firefighting lift area from the car park, or something like, I can't remember exactly where they are, but they're down there in the basement, and they do exist. We've had a couple of them. That's why I'm saying they're less common. And fire extinguishers we're generally flat out removing those from all residential properties.
Yeah.
That's generally the consensus with those, because you run the risk of people who don't even know how to use a fire extinguisher picking it up and going, I'm going to sort that fire out, and then either making it worse by using the wrong thing on the wrong fire, or not putting it out and not escaping the building.
Yeah. We're the same.
Very interesting.
But blankets, they're not common, but they're only for like putting out a cooker fire for something. You just throw it on there, or wrapping it around yourself or someone if they're. That's like the purpose of those, and most people can figure that out.
Yeah.
Don't need training to know to throw a blanket over a fire blanket over a fire.
So the closers, you'd have that as a dedicated just focus.
Well, I guess I put that down, but I kind of think it fits within door sets, doesn't it? Fire doors as a general, but they're not maintained as part of the fire door. They're maintained separately. So closers and door retainers are often maintained or recorded separately to a fire door. And that's because your closer or retainer is an M&E piece of equipment and your door is a structural piece of equipment. So it's almost, they separate it into different teams. You've got your mechanical and electrical part, and then you've got your physical part of the building, your barrier, as it were.
I think that's really helpful. That helps my sort of understanding, because I must admit, when I've learned that door closers are important, it was James Carpenter from your place that made the point about it a few weeks ago when I spoke to him, how important the door closer is. When I've then dug into O&Ms, I found that the information on what the door closer was, or even, it was very poor. And in fact, most of the documentation, even from the manufacturers, it tells you what the performance of that door, what type of door that might be, and then what the door closer that should have been selected for that should be, and what its guidance is, and all that sort of stuff, but not which door closer was actually picked.
Yes, because the door closer is specified not by the M&E person. He doesn't do the specification. He wouldn't even be interested in it, even though it's part of his assets. You know, he doesn't. He if you put it before him, he wouldn't like it at all. It's specified by the architect or the architectural team. They specify that all the door ironmongery, including the door closer. The interesting thing is that the discipline in charge of the keying, you know, the key of the door, master key and so on, is the electrical group. So when you're in operations, you need to know that the door, I don't know why the formal name has just escaped me, but electrical is in charge of stating which doors have the master key, you know, and all of that. That's electrical. So now then the operations team would have to know to go to that document and then know that maybe the M&E is in charge of the door closer, but he is not the one who has specified it. The person who has specified it is within the architectural group.
Yeah.
You know, so if the operations man doesn't know that, he would be just confused, you know. And these are things which would come up. I don't know whether, but it needs to be told. Yeah.
And also retainers are quite often fitted. They can be fitted after the fact, because the purpose of a room or a space could be changed. And it could be, we now need to put a retainer on that to keep that door open. And retainers usually work through audio of the alarm. So a sounder sets it off and it releases it and it closes the door. But it might be that you have a commonly traversed door for wheelchair users or something like that. So they put a retainer in there and leave it open.
But then it's not a fire door anymore.
Well, no, it is, because if the sounder releases and it closes the door, so it works the same way. It's still a fire door. It have a closer at the top. It just has a retainer to release it to close, to allow the door to close when there's a fire.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Audrey, you probably, although you say that the M&E person wouldn't be interested in the specification,
yes,
they need to know if they need to replace it in 5 years' time or 3 years' time.
Yes, so, yeah, that's when they get that's when they'll probably first meet the door closer, to be honest, because at the time when it was being specified and being picked by the architectural or the building team, they wouldn't be interested in it at all. It just doesn't come within their frame. They're busy looking at other big things. And the only time they'll get to meet this door closer or think about it is when they have to replace it. And so if at that time they haven't bought into the process, imagine now going to an M&E person and saying, you've got to help me to pick out a door closer. He probably wouldn't.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
What you said there about the keys is fascinating for me. I didn't realize that at all. Does anybody else know that it's the electrical trade that is responsible for the keying? It's
electrical discipline.
Yeah.
They are the ones who they are the ones who own that document. They are the ones who own that document, the master key strategy. And so they would have to, of course, go to the responsible disciplines to work with the responsible disciplines, and they may just be the ones who sign off. But for purposes of accepting that document, really is done by the lead electrical engineer. He's the one who signs off, and he would get all the information, because they're also taking charge of we use the word discrimination in building. You know, everybody can go through room A and door A, but only certain people can go through door B and door C. You know, they've got to do all of that security. So if it's a sizable infrastructure project, all the master key strategies is signed off by the electrical engineer.
Cool.
It's his document. Yes. He may delegate it, but he's the one who will be tasked. Yeah.
Is that only in buildings where the doors are electrically powered, or is it in normal?
No, not necessarily. I mean, when we've written it, and I must admit it's an oil and gas thing, but we're looking at buildings, not only on the rig. We're looking at all buildings. It's for all doors, because that strategy for door security, access, and all of that, you know, access information, where it would come to if you're using a swipe card or just even what the ironmongery should do. So it's not only for certain kind of doors, it's for all access, all doors on that particular installation. And if the lead electrical engineer delegates it to the architectural team or the M&E team or the IT people or the building systems people to handle it, yes, he can. But if there were to be an incident, the proper thing to do, the correct discipline in charge is lead electrical.
Cool.
Yeah.
One other question to ask, just of you, Audrey. You know, you talked about technical deviation.
Yes.
That's not a term I've heard before. It makes a lot of sense. Is it a widely used term?
It is commonly used, and it's commonly used in, I suppose, large infrastructure projects, and it should be used in buildings as well and for housing associations, because of the fact that there's a supply chain. So oftentimes different contractors and different subcontractors are given a set of specifications to build to. And if they can't meet whatever has been specified, they need to submit a technical deviation request as to why they are changing. They can't meet the specification for door A, but they can give you a similar one, and it does A, B, C, and D. So then it will go to the main contractor's team to assess that technical deviation. It could be a concession. You may give him a concession. You may say, no, go back and get what I really specified, because what you've said to me doesn't meet all my requirements. It doesn't meet the performance. And all of that is captured in the documentation. At the end of the process, when it's been assessed by the relevant disciplines and his deviation request has been accepted, then of course look at the costing and the time, and all of that comes into it, how it would impact the building process, the procurement process. But all of that is captured, at the end of which a technical bulletin is written that we've accepted the deviation and it has zero time impact. The cost is reduced, or so on and so on. But the technical part of it is important. And all of that goes into the change control repository, and then that becomes part of the as-built information. Because, for example, if they've changed the door, if I specified I wanted marine ply, say, and they said to me, well, I can't give you marine plywood, I can give you hardwood, or I can give you softwood, and you need to assess it, because it might cause a problem later on. There could be a time when it could be a storm in a century, like we've seen, could be a storm in half a century or so on, and then suddenly all the things that were specified and which were not accepted but were built now have an issue. So technical deviations is a very critical part of building and the building procurement process, and it should be really used. I'm sure that they have a term that they use in everyday building, but it's either a deviation request. It's a little bit more nuanced than a change request, but it's captured as part of that process. Yeah.
Okay. I'm taking it that question 5 is completed. Anybody disagree with that? Anyone have anything else to add to question 5? Briefly. I'll take that as a no. I'll take that as a cut. And thank you very much indeed. What a great afternoon and what a great session.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll see some of you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers.
Fiona, see you again.